Sabrina?
I've got it open if you need me to do it. I kind of
she's ready to do it. Just got on.
Okay, great.
All right, I couldn't find my mouse on my screen to unmute myself. Okay. Member Linderman, County Mendocino.
I'm now representing the county as the TAC member in James's place.
Yeah, we need to update the website a little bit.
Member White, City of Ukiah. Okay. Member Todd, Upper Russian River Water Agency. Member Silva, Tribal Representative.
Morning. Here.
Thank you. Member Pauline, Agriculture Representative.
Levi Paulin isn't the ag representative anymore. It's Adam Gaska.
I'm here.
Hi, Adam.
Okay. Member Seymour, Sonoma County, or Sonoma Water.
I don't see Dawn yet.
Member Webster, Mendocino County RCD.
Mike, you out there? Nope.
Member Marcus, California Land Stewardship. Okay.
Hi, Laurel.
Hi.
And Chair Solomon.
I'm here. All right, let's get this party started. Next is public comment on items not on the agenda. This time is reserved for the public to address the TAC about matters not on the agenda and within the jurisdiction of the TAC. Persons wanting to speak on the specific agenda items should do so at the time specified for those items. In other words, if you want to say something during the meeting, please use the raise hand function when we call for public comment. Any public comment from folks? We've moved this to the beginning of the agenda as most of our member agencies do hold their public comment at the beginning of meetings. Welcome to hear some feedback if people like it at the beginning rather than the end. Okay, again, please feel free to add public comment during the meeting for each agenda item. Okay, current drought conditions and emergency executive order N722. The TAC is going to discuss the current drought conditions and the emergency executive order. And Eric, I believe you have a slide for us, a slide presentation.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Beth. Really appreciate it. So we'll jump right into it. So these figures in the map that you see here, I pulled from DWR, and on the map to the left here, you can see that all the DWR monitored wells in the County Mendocino are reporting as dry. So we are in a record drought year, and you can see this increase in the number of dry wells current in the drought conditions we're in. And this data is updated as of April. And some stats that I grabbed from the U.S. Drought Monitor. As of the end of March, the County of Mendocino has experienced its 8th driest March on record, with precipitation being 5.5 inches below normal. And in addition, the period from January to March of this year has been the driest on record compared to any other January to March on record, and with precipitation 23 inches below normal. So we're in some pretty dry conditions right now. In terms of the executive order, on March 28th, 2022, Governor Newsom signed the executive order N722, and its main aim is to protect all water users in 4 different categories. The main category that is associated with the GSA that we have to dive more into is regarding safeguarding groundwater supplies, which there's 2 aspects to this. There's one, which is it requires the local permitting authorities to coordinate with the GSA to ensure new proposed wells do not compromise existing wells or infrastructure, as 85% of public water systems rely heavily on groundwater during drought. The second aspect of it is it streamlines the permitting for groundwater recharge projects that help to refill aquifers when the rains come. And if you would like to get a full understanding and read through the entire executive order, you can find it at this link below. So there's two aspects to the executive order that really focus in on how it relates to the GSA and the permitting agency, which in this case would be the County of Mendocino Environmental Health. And the first one is 9A. And so 9A states, to protect the health and safety environment during this drought emergency, a county, a city, or the public agency shall not approve a permit for new groundwater well or for an alteration of existing well in the basin that's subject to SGMA and is within a medium or high priority basin without first obtaining written verification of from the GSA that's managing the basin. And the main pieces of that is that the verification is asking the GSA to provide a verification that is looking at that proposed well or the alteration of that well does not make that well be in a position to where it would be inconsistent with the SMCs or a minimum threshold, a trigger or something like that. And then also looking at whether or not that well would have a decrease of the likelihood of achieving sustainability goal. So that is the role that is being imposed upon to the GSAs to provide a written verification for a well permit. And then the second aspect of this is it relates to the county environmental health and being the permitting agency. And it's basically asking for proposed wells to be evaluated whether or not if they're going to be interfering with production of a nearby existing well, or if it would cause subsidence in any way that would adversely damage infrastructure. And then there's another caveat to this executive order, which is this doesn't apply to wells that are pumping less than 2 acre feet per year for individual domestic users, or for wells that are exclusively for groundwater to public water supply systems as defined under this health and safety code. So what does this ultimately mean from an implementation standpoint? And so we're currently in discussions with the county to figure out this process. But as of right now, we have this process in mind, which is that a permit would be filed that would be submitted to the County of Mendocino Environmental Health. That permit would be shared with the GSA. And then the GSA, either through an ad hoc committee or some other mechanism, would review that permit to evaluate 9A and 9B and provide written verification of the well. Either, yes, this well is consistent with not infringing upon the sustainability goals or an SMC or something of that nature. Or if it is infringing upon that, then we would provide a written verification asking for more clarification on certain aspects we have concerns over. And then that would go back to the county environmental health, and then that permit would then be reviewed by them. And one thing to note here is that the county environmental health, since they're the well permitting agency, they're the primary authority on whether or not a permit gets approved. So our written verification would ultimately be information that's shared with them, but the county ultimately has the final decision on that. And then they would go about either approving or denying that permit. And then there's been a lot of updates since the executive order has been shared. So I'm going to pass it off back to Beth to share on several aspects that she learned at a local conference in Sacramento last month, or earlier this month.
Thanks, Eric. Sabrina, can we get Sean White, Don Seymour, and Deborah Edelman into the panelist list as well? I believe Deborah's probably stepping in for Mike Webster today from the Resource Conservation District. Thank you. Okay, so I went to the Aqua Conference. We had a lot of discussions and panels and presentations. Mostly the ones that we really were interested in were the regulators, so people from the state. There were some main points. The intent of this inclusion in the executive order is to provide, well, the executive order itself is to provide tools to reduce the impact of the drought. Specifically for the GSAs, This would be to prevent groundwater wells, especially domestic wells and wells in serving disadvantaged communities, to prevent them from harmful impacts of the drought, such as going dry. There's a record number of wells going dry in the state. And it's also to address the short-term undesirable impacts that are not addressed in the GSPs, such as the GDEs and the interconnected groundwater surface water. So our GSP addresses that on a long term, but there was a recognition that the drought has really amplified the timeline. And in most areas, something needs to, the things need to begin now. GSA and well permitting so I sent out last night the written staff report with my update, and it will have a lot more information. But the GSA actions regarding well permitting, as Eric said, the main thing to take away here is well permitting authority and responsibility is not shifting to the GSA. What the intention there is to build communication and coordination between the well permitting authority and the local GSA to make sure that the well permitting is not negatively impacting the plan, right? So that they're not approving wells that are going to go against what we've spent all this time developing for long-term sustainability. The drought section in my report, there seem to be some contradicting points, which has been really challenging trying to find a balance. The GSAs are not responsible for short-term drought response. That's been the norm. But now, again, with the intensification of the drought conditions, we need to look at PMAs that will advance long-term sustainability goals, such as recharge and monitoring. And the thing that I took away the most was a very passionate explanation from a state water board member that said, we can't just sit around and wait. If GSAs don't conduct mitigating projects for another 5 years, if we just do monitoring and just kind of figure out where we are and we don't do anything for 5 years, we could miss a great opportunity, of high precipitation that may not occur again in the following years. We may have another drought. So the state is urging GSAs to act immediately because from a groundwater perspective, 2042 is around the corner. So later we're going to talk about what PMAs we could best utilize in our region to advance our particular goals in our plan. The funding and resources was a bit of a shock. The state made it very clear they are not going to fund the ongoing operations of GSAs. There will be this implementation funding. They're focusing, some of it will be obviously for operations, especially in areas like ours, but they're really looking for projects. Beyond that, we have to figure it out, is basically the message that I received. Each region has to fund their own operations and maintenance of their GSA. The funding that's coming down now, they're really trying to bring that quickly trying to bring it in quickly and trying to streamline permits and processes for those to happen. So the enforcement was really interesting. There was a bit of a discussion about, okay, we've got this executive order, GSAs are supposed to do all this. What's the enforcement? And the DWR clearly said, well, there's no real enforcement here, except that when you go to apply for funding, if you are not complying, you're not going to get your grant funding. So we need to think about that for a GSA that's really dependent on that implementation funding grant for this next cycle. We've talked a lot about the State Water Board, and if our GSA doesn't meet the standard, and if we fall to a certain level, and the State Water Board steps in, what does that look like? They made it very clear that they're willing to do that, they're ready to do that, but they don't want to do that. They want their control to remain in the region, and their powers are very limited. They can set fees, they can implement monitoring, and they can implement demand management. but they can't move forward with projects and things like that. So that's still on the GSA to do. So it's very discouraging. They were discouraging GSAs to get to that point. Do not get to the point where the state has to step in. For the future, suspension of CEQA requirements, streamlining recharge efforts. These are actions that are encouraging GSAs to prepare project implementation for this coming winter in case it rains. We've had too many drought years. We all have to think like this winter it's going to rain. So are we ready for that? What are we going to do with that rain? Especially in our system, we have flashy system. We have a lot of surplus that runs quickly. We all need to be thinking of small projects that can help take that water in and bank it. There's also, the other thing to think about with the executive order, it's not permanent and it is expected to be repealed when the drought conditions subside. So this well permitting flow chart, while it's not permanent, it is encouraged to continue to keep this communication going. And in the discussions we've had with the well permitting authority here, the county, we made that intention clear and there seems to be some acceptance of that. There is some further information. I would really encourage everyone to watch the State Water Board meeting of May 10th. There is a review of SGMA. It doesn't cover the executive order specifically, but it does go back and talk about what SGMA was intended to do, how it's going, and what happens if the state steps in. Okay, any thoughts or questions about that? Did I miss anything? Okay. Eric, let's see. It looks like we have an interactive tool. Okay, before we go to the interactive tool, I just want to again put it out there. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the slides here? I know several of you were at the Aqua conference. Do you have anything to add about your impressions of what the latest update? Laurel?
Yeah, my question is on the very first slide that Eric showed. If you could go back to that. Oh, there you go. Okay, so this dry wells reported to DWR, is that for Mendocino County or the whole state?
This is showing the whole state, and then I just zoomed in on Mendocino County and just looking at all the red dots as being reported dry wells.
Okay, so in this little graph here where you're showing it going from next to nothing to a very big number, that's the entire state. It's not Mendocino.
That's okay. For the entire state, yes.
All right, had me scared. All right, thank you.
No, that's a great question to ask to clarify. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Laurel. I think it just goes to the intent of the executive order too, sort of the justification for taking such extreme measures, because there are really extreme conditions all over the state. But I will remind everyone, there's a spotlight on the Russian River. That's one thing that I noticed when I was at the conference is people would just randomly walk up and say, "Oh, you're from the Russian River. Wow, sorry." Okay, any other comments or questions? So when we're doing this interactive tool, which I'm going to let Eric introduce, but I wanted to point out when I was reading over the slides, this question is about the compliance. What may adversely impact our compliance with the GSP and SGMA? It's not necessarily what we think would be the best options for our community. It's really about compliance. And Eric, I wanted to make sure that was the focus of this question. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Take it away.
And actually, I see a hand up by Devin, if you wanted to address that first.
Sorry about that, Devin. Go ahead. You can bring Devin in too. And it looks like Dawn still is in the attendees.
Okay, I invited them both in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Devin, are you able to unmute?
Yay. Well, thank you.
There you go. Thanks for your patience. We're trying.
Yeah, no problem. I just had a question. I happened to be at a State Farm Bureau meeting a couple weeks ago with Joaquin Escobar and the head of DWR. And, obviously this was a hot topic since no one really understands sort of where this is going with this governor's order. So DWR mentioned that they were going to be developing some additional guidance documents to provide, and I may have missed that, so I apologize, but did that come up at Aqua in terms of DWR sort of working through some of these general questions and concerns?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That is in my report briefly. The DWR is working on a drinking water well guidance for release in summer 2022. That will be a written document. And then I think there will be also, there's probably going to be workshops and some support documents for that. But I would ask Amir, Laura, Dawn, if any of you had more information on that from the conference. Or anyone else who was there. I think you guys were the only ones. Oh, Chelsea, go ahead. Welcome.
The one other thing I was going to add is they had a fact sheet on the executive order, but they're finishing up another longer FAQ document that should be released around the end of this week. They had a webinar with counties and they took all the questions that they received there. So that was the only other thing.
Thank you. All right, any other responses to Devin's question about materials, support materials?
Just really quick as a follow-up, and we may get to this, so just stop me. But I was just trying to figure out sort of the right venue to invite community members who have questions, concerns, mostly from the agricultural community, since this order is really, in theory, directed towards them. So, I would want this group to maybe think about, whether, our GSA is willing to do a specific workshop and have a bigger outreach and invite. I didn't sort of blast this meeting out today because I wasn't sure how in depth we were going to go. Or I'm happy to do something independently, but I really think it'd be good, since the order really directs this entity to be the sort of determining factor. So just think about that, I guess, in terms of when we might be able to put something on.
Thanks, Devin. I think that is an excellent idea. And I think it follows along with our advanced communication and outreach plan, which we're going to be looking at later at the board level. So Eric, can we work on that? Maybe you and I and Devin can meet and talk about how we can facilitate that. Thanks, Devin. I think that's a great idea. Are there any other areas where we feel outreach, specific outreach would be important on this? If you think of something, just give me an email or call. Okay, let's move on to this interactive tool. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you can go to menti.com, I have it pulled up on my phone. You may or may not be able to see that very well, but essentially it's going to ask you to put in this code at the top, which is 41875965. You type that in, and then you'll see this question prompt with a couple of fill-ins that you can type in and answer. And this is going to generate a word cloud, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion on your guys' input. So if you can just take a moment to do that, that would be great. And we're just looking for what are your concerns with the 2022 drought conditions that may adversely impact our compliance with the GSP and SGMA.
Hi, Eric. Is this for just the TAC members or all the panelists that you have? I'm just trying to see if I should.
This is primarily for the TAC members, but if Beth would like to invite others to also participate, that is her choice.
No, that was good. I just wanted to make sure.
What do other TAC members think? Do you want to hear from everybody? Thumbs up or thumb down, anybody?
Who is
I
currently?
say everybody. This is Laurel.
Laurel says everybody. Sean?
I would say everybody as well.
Okay, great. That was my thought too, so let's do it. Please feel free to go to Menti, www.menti.com. The code is at the top of the shared screen right now. And can you only put one word in? Is that?
You can do 3 entries.
Oh, but you can't put a phrase. You just had a single word. Okay.
You can do a phrase.
Oh,
you can do a phrase. Yep. Give another minute. If you haven't already participated, please feel free to input a few more.
And we're going to be using this tool again, correct?
Yeah, so we're going to be using it throughout. And ultimately, whatever we get as the result from this particular one right here, I'm going to screenshot it and it'll be available for future use to look at in the future.
Well, if people are finishing that, I just want to put this out there as something for folks to think about. We've switched to this webinar presentation mode, and then we have panelists. In the past, we've just done a straight Zoom meeting. And we also don't have the chat enabled this time, but we've talked about being able to do that under Brown Act compliance. So not necessarily in our short meeting today, but if you'd like to provide Eric or myself with some feedback on this change in presentation, whether you like it or you want to suggest something else, just any feedback you would have would be great.
Right. So the way this word cloud works is that whatever is the biggest is what's been inputted the most. And so it looks like minimum thresholds and funding are the 2 most inputted responses, but there are quite a few other ones. And so Beth, I don't know which ones you would like to open discussion about for a couple minutes on first.
I'll take raised hands. Anybody have any feedback? Just raise your hand. I'll call on you. That includes attendees that are not panelists. If you can just use the raise hand function. So again, the question was, what are the tax concerns with the 2022 drought conditions that may adversely impact our compliance? Michael?
On like the topic of minimum thresholds, LWA had that annual report for the last water year, and the majority of wells showed, continuous decline up until like the end of 2021, where there was a little bit of recovery, but it's been pretty dry since then. And, most of I don't think the elevations are higher than any of the minimum thresholds, but some came pretty close. So, this drought now, and I think we're going to hit some of those.
Okay, so warning, I'm going to call on each of the TAC members, and then we'll take general public comment as well. So I'm going to call on Sean and then Javier. Sean, thoughts?
Yeah, we're not seeing anything concerning in our wells yet. But if it continues for the next few years, I just put continuing drought, then I'm sure we'll start scratching them. But as soon as we get rain, they always recover quickly. So I'm really not sure, it's really just going to depend on when it starts raining again.
Javier?
Yeah, I just think that I think I have a fear that there's going to be the continued use as normal, like there was a normal year of rain, that we have the supply. And I think I honestly think the public perception of the drought is not as serious as this concern, and so I think that there may be a lack of, conservation. Within the tribal community, we've already begun talking about conservation and everybody's pretty good about it. But I think that's my one concern based on that question.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Adam and then Dawn.
Yeah, I'm worried about water quality getting worse. I was talking to a friend that they have a cannabis farm, and basically through the testing, which I guess was a good thing, they realized that their water was high in arsenic, and it's which they had tested it before in the past. It had been a couple of years and it didn't show any at all. And then now, which part of it's because cannabis is an accumulator. It accumulates arsenic like rice does. And so they have two wells luckily for them, and they had them both tested, and one was the shallower one didn't have arsenic. It was a deeper one that did. And so I was just telling him, like, well, you probably should start mixing your water, trying to lower the amount of arsenic, but I imagine people that aren't checking it, especially drinking water, it could be an issue that they don't realize they have, because it's not like they'll be able to taste it. And it's maybe something we should tell people. Maybe they should start testing their wells once a year, even just for mineral content, and boron's the other one, obviously. That hopefully it doesn't become an increased issue.
Thanks, Adam. We'll go to Dawn and then Laurel. Dawn?
Yeah. So I do have concerns about the minimum thresholds. We're in a historic drought still, and the fact that none of the thresholds were actually storage didn't decline to any of those thresholds is a little concerning, that maybe those are not protective of groundwater. In Sonoma County, a number of wells did decline below the thresholds that were set. So I think that's something the TAC and the GSA might want to revisit. Are the minimum thresholds protective?
Thanks, Dawn. We'll go to Laurel, and then I'm going to call on Deborah Edelman. Laurel?
Well, I kind of agree with Javier about the public not really taking this seriously at all. One of the things we've learned by having that drought group is that agricultural water and urban water are about equal in demand over the summer months. And we know that we're going to have curtailments very likely, but I really wonder what that's going to mean for the urban folks. Are they going to start recognizing that green lawn is no longer something they should have? We see this all over California. The farmers don't have any water, but the urban people don't seem to take it seriously at all. So I would love to figure out how we get more people to realize that they don't get to waste water anymore. They just don't.
Thanks, Laurel.
And Beth, just a quick time check. We have about 22 minutes till we go to the board portion.
Okay, great, thanks. Deborah and then Devin.
Hi, I'm just going to echo what other people have said. I'm concerned about hitting those minimum thresholds over the course of the summer. I think the messaging and information for the public is really crucial, that everyone realizes that just what Laurel said, that they can't, having a green lawn all summer is not realistic at this point. And I'm also concerned about the GSA's ability to implement these PMAs quickly. Like you were saying, Elizabeth, the recommendation was to try to get things going for this coming winter, which is a really short time frame. That really concerns me. Conservation is something that can be done on a relatively quick timeline and possibly getting in some, tanks for storage, but most things take longer than that. And even those things can take a while. So that's a concern of mine as well.
Great, thanks, Deborah. We'll talk about that in the next item too. And I'm gonna follow up with Devin, and then unless there's any other comments, we're gonna move on. Devin?
I'll be quick. I said proactive, not reactive. I think, this is short-term and long-term. And, yes, this is, going into a third year of drought. No arguments from me, but I want to see us look at being productive and not necessarily just being always sort of reacting to the next crisis, which may or may not truly be. So I would just like us to look at the bigger picture.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I want you guys to think about taking these drought concerns to this next agenda item, which is the PMAs and the grant funding opportunities. We're going to discuss and provide feedback on identified PMAs for the round 2 of the GSP implementation grant funding. Just as a reminder, that grant funding, which we thought would be sooner rather than later, is now being pushed towards the end of this year, early 23, before it'll be opened. We will discuss the PMAs that were identified in the GSP and provide feedback on priority ranking. And then this information is going to go to the board in the workshop following this one today. Eric?
Thank you, Beth. So right now, DWR is working on putting out their second round of funding, specifically for Sigma implementation funds. There's a couple of key things I wanted to point out. With some grants that I've worked with in the past, there's been a local cost share that was required. From what I have gathered, there is no local cost share required, which is a big benefit to this GSA. So there is no need at this time to include funds to help support your scoring to get grant funding. And then also there's money been set aside specifically for underrepresented communities and severely disadvantaged communities. And then as Beth mentioned, that there is currently the DWR is mentioning they're pushing the solicitation for these grants to the end of the year, and that might even be pushed into the following year in January or February of 2023. So that actually gives us a window of opportunity to spend more time to discuss about grants and find a strategy and identify the right projects we would like to include in those grant applications. Who's eligible? It's GSAs, member of GSAs, tribes, and NGOs that represent a GSA. But one important note is that there's only one application that will be accepted per basin, and applicants who apply on behalf of a GSA must obtain and submit a letter of support from the GSA they represent. In this case, it's likely that the GSA, we would take that role and submit that application on behalf of all the member agencies. So that is one note to keep in mind. So they've sort of changed in terms of what activities they're going to support. Originally, in the grant documents that they have, they allowed administration costs to implement the GSP as part of it. But they've noted at the Aqua Conference, as Beth pointed out, that their preference will be given towards grants that are more focused on implementing projects and not covering normal administration costs. So that's a really important aspect. And then a part of that too is they also support projects or funds that could be tied to doing revisions or updates to the GSP. And I know that that is something that has been noted in the GSP for this basin, is that there will be updates and potentially revisions to the SMCs based on updated data that we get over the next couple of years. So that is also something that does count as an activity towards the grant. And then in terms of just sort of framing what potentially could fall into this, right? So in terms of revisions and updates, updating the GSP SMCs using data from newly installed monitoring wells, that could be an activity that can be included in a grant application. And reports that are due every year, that could also be included. Model updates could be included. Monitoring activities could be included. In terms of capital improvement activities, those fall into the Tier 2 PMAs that were listed in the GSP. That includes projects that are a part of a lead agency. Let's say the city of Ukiah is a lead agency on a couple projects. Those projects could be eligible also. It's not just GSA-led projects that were identified in the GSP. It could be any of the PMAs that are identified by any of the agencies that are a member agency, but also the lead agency being the GSA. And then in terms of administration costs, we've already noted that that those costs are unlikely to be favorable towards the grant. But if there is costs related to managing the grant and doing oversight of the grant activities related to those projects, that could be included, and that should be justifiable.
Okay, so as we've been going, Eric went through that, I've been kind of looking over the notes I took from your comments. And my summary is that the drought continues. It's going to challenge the quality and quantity of supply. Our minimum thresholds in the GSP are too low. Lack of public awareness and demand reduction. We need to be proactive and implement PMAs immediately that will take advantage of winter water supply, with this overlying question of, what if we have another dry winter? Okay, so this is what I'm hearing back from you. Now we want to look at the PMAs. I hope I took a little bit of time yesterday, went over the chapter of PMAs. I hope some of you got the opportunity to do that or just remember them so well. So this question is, what two PMAs within the GSP, Tier 2 PMAs that we should be focusing on? Are we doing the tool to identify these, or are we having a chat about it first?
Yes, we're gonna do the tool. We can have a chat before if you want.
Okay, let's see. TAC members, does anybody have a comment before we move into the interactive tool? Or do you want to do the tool and talk about the PMAs that pop up?
You're talking about PMAs specifically for the coming fiscal year, correct?
Well, that's something to think about. I really like your point, and we need to identify some PMAs that will take advantage of the winter supply if it comes this year. But as I was thinking about this yesterday, I think maybe we need a little bit of both. Maybe we need one that is more of a long term, like Devin was talking about, being a little more proactive on the longer range, as well as things that we can implement now. Why don't we go to the tool, and then that gives us a chance to kind of absorb the thought, or calibrate our thoughts, and then we'll use that as a talking point. So we go back to menti.com.
Yes, you go back to menti.com. If you hit refresh, this should show up once you type in the code, and it should be asking you to pick your top 2 projects and management actions.
Read out the code because it's a little bit small. I know it's hard for me to see it. 41875965. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, everyone. I see Sean's hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I'm just kind of unclear, right? So you've been talking about doing PMAs that will take advantage of rainfall in the next winter, but I don't really see any of these doing that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that too.
So that could be a discussion point, that maybe there's a PMA that is in the Tier 2 PMA list that people are aware of that they want to bring up as a discussion point.
All right, looks like we've got 10 responses in. Sean, did you have something else? Your hand's still up. Thanks. Okay, let's go ahead and discuss. If you're still working on the Menti, that's fine. Yeah, Sean brings up a really good point. So what we're looking, so Eric, clarify for me what you're looking for.
Yes, so the clarification point here is that from the grant discussion we were having a moment before, the idea behind now doing what PMAs we want to try to prioritize this coming year is sort of have a discussion about which ones would be probably the highest priority to include as part of the grant, or which ones do we want to start proactively working towards as a GSA to get the process started, regardless of the grant being funded to help support some of those projects or not.
All right, so we have the implementation grant, and within that we have the opportunity of doing, implementing the GSP and doing some the annual reports and things like that. And then we also have an opportunity to apply for other grant funding, right? I mean, that's a possibility through the GSA or its member agencies with cooperation. So looks like monitoring activities is by far, one of the most popular. The rate and fee study is something that the GSA has been planning on doing to continue funding it, which groundwater well inventory kind of feeds into that rate and fee study and provides the monitoring as well. Outreach and education, we just heard a lot about that. And then we have pretty much this, the last four have about the same amount of votes each. So I want to open it up again to the TAC members. So what I'm looking for is, I'm going to bring this information to the board in a few minutes here. So let's start. Sorry, everybody's calling to find out what's going on with the water supply. Let's call on the TAC members. I'll go with, let's start with Dawn and then Laurel. Any thoughts about our results?
Well, I agree with Sean. I don't see those as near-term projects for leveraging water that might be available next year. So I guess I would throw out there something different. I would think, we just received, the Dry Creek Rancheria just received a $6.9 million grant from DWR for a flood mar project. Sonoma Water received a $400,000 grant from the County of Sonoma to also be looking at flood mar in the Alexander Valley. So it seems to me that would be a pretty immediate project that could be implemented, maybe not quite next year, but pretty near term. Some type of small pilot projects with monitoring systems to evaluate the benefit of using high winter flows in the Russian River to infiltrate into certain agricultural lands that might, landowners that might be willing to participate.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Laurel and then Adam.
Well, I agree with Dawn that these are not really projects. I do think having a groundwater well inventory would help us a lot in figuring out how to manage groundwater. I think we're continuing the monitoring activities. I've been always pushing to do continuous groundwater monitoring, not the 2 measurements a year, just because that just doesn't give you enough information. So I kind of agree with those two on the top. I'm sure the rate and fee study will be very controversial because nobody wants to spend more money. And then I'm not sure what outreach and education is about. Even though I said it was important, I'm not sure what we're outreaching and educating about. Is it about water conservation?
That's a good question. Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. Adam and then Sean.
Yeah, I think I voted for groundwater well inventory at the top, just I mean, to me, it felt like it does kind of fit in with monitoring, at least the way I think of monitoring. But I mean, yeah, none of these are really projects, but we kind of should look at where water is being used, and then where we should try to identify where we could do some recharge projects. Prioritizing areas where there is a high extraction rate, which we don't really know without a lot of metering. But I think if we at least knew where wells were, we could at least have an educated guess on what areas are being impacted the most, and try to prioritize those areas having some recharge projects.
Thanks, Adam. Sean, then Javier.
I went with monitoring, but, agree with everyone else about there could be more aggressive actions.
Okay. Javier, and then I see Doug's hand up. Let's, I'll go to Javier first though.
This was difficult for me I didn't select anything. I agree that the monitoring is important, but yeah, I'm in favor of groundwater recharge. I'm also in groundwater retention. Not necessarily recharge, but also just retention of what is available. So that means monitoring, making sure people aren't using. Yeah, this has been on my mind about what types of projects we could develop that would encourage that, and I would be happy to support that and figure that out.
Thanks, Javier. Doug, did you want to add something, or?
Yeah, the city has the percolation ponds at the sewer treatment plant, which are now not heavily used. The last couple of seasons, not at all, or damn little. That might be some low-hanging fruit for recharge, because those perk ponds have a lot of surface area, and historically have been where some of the treated water has been put back into the system. Now that water is going to reservoirs for primarily ag community. So maybe those ponds could be repurposed for recharge if we can come up with a way with some projects to collect stormwater and get it to those ponds. Just a thought.
Thanks, Doug. I want to finish with the TAC members. I'm going to go to Michael, and then I'm going to ask Deborah and Devin. So Michael.
I think I chose monitoring, or the top three were my picks, with, adding more monitoring wells. It's something we identified in the GSP with their monitoring network. There's a lot of gaps. So I think the DWR would probably be looking for us to address that pretty quickly. And then if we improve our monitoring network, we can, it'll help us identify additional PMAs or give us just a better understanding of what's going on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Deborah and then Devin, and I recognize that we've gone over time and the board meeting is starting in a few minutes. So sorry about that, folks.
I just want to speak quickly about, even though none of these are projects, both outreach and education and voluntary metering can result in water use reduction. And so I just want to advocate for those. I think those are both really important.
Thank you. Devin?
So I was looking at this as how any of these options could sort of overlap into bigger projects. And that's where I sort of looked at the monitoring as being sort of an expansion of guidance. The one question that I still have about, how AgMAR or FloodMAR really works is, looking at geologies, looking at cooperative landowners, looking at, where this is actually going to function. Doug's point is pretty interesting to look into existing infrastructure that's not going to impact additional land uses, but might provide benefit. So that's where I was sort of looking at monitoring, was not necessarily, I agree with Michael's point, but I think that there's other options that could be broadened to look at future projects.
Yeah, thank you. So what I've been thinking about, again, this list doesn't really, incorporate all of the GSP or all the PMAs in the GSP. We're getting a little bit of feedback. If anybody wants to mute, that'd be great. Recharge and water banking, I hear and any of these projects that are going to increase monitoring. So if we do a recharge or water banking projects, they can include monitoring, additional monitoring. I hear a lot about outreach and education and really like honing in on what that means. Does that mean with the intention of demand reduction? Does it mean voting for a sales tax to help fund some of these projects? Or, and then we do have climate change impact assessment lower down there. I don't know, that's kind of a long-term project I was thinking about. It has less priority than the immediate. Okay, so I think we're gonna call an end to this meeting. We're gonna be transitioning into our board meeting in a few minutes. Anybody have a final comment or pitch you wanna throw in? I apologize for this feeling a bit rushed today. We'll go back to a longer TAC meeting in the future. Okay, so we're gonna take a 30-second break, I guess. Eric, are we?
Yeah, 30-second break is fine. And thank everyone so much for your input. Just keep in mind that a lot of these topics were to set up future discussions going forward. And so none of these topics are not gonna be discussed again. This is informing our future discussions. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, great. So I invite everyone to take a quick break and come back for the board meeting. The meeting is adjourned at 9:30. Hey, Michael, can you remind me what your
It is approximately 9:34 a.m. and I'm calling the meeting to order. And Eric or Sabrina, if you would like to call roll call.
Okay, Director Crane, City of Ukiah.
Present.
Director White, Russian River Flood Control.
Present.
Director LaRue, Upper Russian River Water Agency. Okay. Director Navarez, Tribal Seat. Director Robinson, Agriculture Seat.
I am partially present, but I will be leaving the meeting a little bit early, and I'm hoping that Adam will step in as the alternate for Ag when I'm not present.
I can do that, and I am here as well.
Okay, Chair McGorty.
I'm here.
Great, that's.
All right, so next on our agenda are consent items. And I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. But before we do that, are there any questions or any items that people would like to pull? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
This is Al. I'll move to approve it.
Is there a second? Surely someone will second the consent agenda. Come on, don't be shy, speak up.
Crane, second.
Okay, so moved and seconded for the consent agenda. So Sabrina, if you'd like to do a roll call for it.
Okay, Director Crane.
Aye.
Director White.
Aye.
Director Robinson.
Aye.
And Chair McGorty.
Yes. Yes, next we're going to move on to discussion and possible action items. Item A is general drought conditions and emergency executive order N722. So Eric, I'd like you to lead the discussion for this based on what you know, and other board members can chime in if there's something they want to make a point about.
Great, thank you, Chair McGorty. 2022 drought conditions have been quite severe. So I'm going to point you to two aspects of this slide. The first is that this is a map of the California wells that are monitored by DWR. And these are the dry wells reported by DWR. The red dots are representing dry wells. The blue dots are representing wells that are not dry. I point out this little arrow for the Mendocino County, and here's Mendocino County here. And as you can see, all the dry wells, all the wells in Mendocino County are reporting dry. And this is as of last month. And then this chart right here is a representation of the number of dry wells being reported from 2018 and 2022 across the entire state. So that just gives you a picture of the severity of the drought that we are currently in. I also pulled some stats from the U.S. Drought Monitor. And as of March, the County of Mendocino has experienced its 8th driest March on record, with precipitation being 5.5 inches below normal. And in addition, the period from January to March of this year has been the driest on record compared to any other January to March period on record, with precipitation being 23 inches below normal. On March 28th, 2022, Governor Newsom signed an executive order, N722, that aims to protect all water users. And there's one particular aspect of this executive order that is focused related to the GSAs. And it's mainly focused on safeguarding groundwater supplies. It requires the local permitting authorities to coordinate with the groundwater sustainability agencies to ensure new proposed wells do not compromise existing wells or infrastructure. And the second aspect of it is it streamlines permitting for groundwater recharge projects that help to refill aquifers when the rains come. If you'd like to see the entire executive order and read through that, that is available at this link below. There are two aspects to the executive order that directly relate to the GSAs and the county permitting agency. In this case, that's the county environmental health. 9A states that for a basin that is a medium to high priority basin, that the GSA provides written verification from the GSA that's managing the basin to the local permitting agency on whether or not a well or a proposed well or a well modification would not be inconsistent with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Program, or if it is consistent with the program, and if it would or would not decrease the likelihood of achieving sustainability goal. The second aspect of that, which is 9B, it is looking at the permitting process related to evaluating a well, if it's likely to interfere or not likely to interfere with the production and functioning of an existing nearby well, and whether or not it is likely or not likely to cause subsidence that would adversely impact or damage nearby infrastructure. And this does not apply to wells that are pumping less than 2 acre-feet a year for individual domestic users. And it's also not including groundwater public supply systems that are under this certain section of Health Safety Code. And so in terms of this executive order, what does this all mean? Basically, it means that there's got to be increased coordination between the GSA and the county permitting agency. And so this diagram was created to help illustrate sort of the process that is currently being discussed with the county environmental health and the GSA to try to coordinate with one another. And so with a permit that's being submitted, it would go to the county environmental health. They would share that permit with the GSA, and then the GSA, either through an ad hoc committee or some other function, would review those permits and evaluate the 9A criteria and potentially 9B criteria and provide a written verification either in the form of a letter, and then providing that written verification, either a yes or a no with concerns that need to be addressed, back to the county permitting agency. And ultimately, important note about this is that the county environmental health, they are the primary permitting agency, and the power to permit a well still solely falls upon their jurisdiction. The GSA is being, with this executive order, is being encouraged to coordinate with them to provide our assessment based on the executive order criteria, but ultimately it's up to the permitting agency to say yes or no. And then that would be approved or denied and go back to the well permittee. So as mentioned, the general manager and Director McGordy and others are currently engaged with the County Mendocino Environmental Health to identify how the GSA will coordinate with the county to comply with this executive order. And so our intention is that at the June board meeting, we would recommend that the board consider forming an ad hoc committee to review all permits subject to the executive order. And this committee would likely benefit from participation of both board and TAC members, legal counsel, and if needed, technical consultants, where we might want to evaluate a couple of those items related to 9B, if that is what the county environmental health would like us to also support them on. So I'll direct it back to Chair McGordy.
Is there anyone who's interested in being on this committee, or will I have to choose volunteers? Okay, Al will do it.
No, I'm not volunteering. I want to make it. First of all, I don't want to be on a bird committee. And this is ad hoc. It's not a hawk. There's little Latin words here that we need to know. Anyway, I don't know if we want to get that heavy into it. I think that this could be a discussion just with staff there. It's not that complicated.
Well, it could be complicated. It depends who you're talking to. So I'm on another ad hoc that's looking at, commercial water extraction, and the feeling of that group is that they want hydrologic studies, they want monitoring. They want meters. So that hasn't been kind of the approach we've taken in the past. We've taken a little bit lighter hand. You know, I think it depends a little bit on the situation. So if someone's replacing a well that they've been using and it's not a completely new well, that's very different than someone who is saying, I really don't want to be diverting water directly from the river anymore. So what I want to do is put a new well end down into, you know, the aquifer 2. So these are the kinds of things that we sort of have to have a discussion on. Devin, you have your hand raised.
Well, I've been following this for a while. Like I said, obviously, if de minimis users are excluded, municipal users are excluded, who's left? It's ag. And that's really what this is targeting. So I think there needs to be some significant participation and outreach within the agricultural community on this. I'm getting a lot of confusion, lots of questions in terms of, you know, grandfathering, you know, what happens if I needed to, you know, pull a pump and do maintenance. I've heard, and this is all secondhand, that environmental health has been giving, you know, variable directions as folks have come in. So I think it's really important to, you know, have some sort of a consensus. The other questions I had, and I know DWR mentioned in the TAC meeting that they're coming out with a FAQ by the end of this week, but a couple of points that brought up, and Eric may have addressed one of these, was CEQA. Where does CEQA analysis fall in this if we're sort of going into this, you know, you can or you can't determination on groundwater? Is that going to be falling back to the county, you know, if environmental health truly is the permitting agency? Again, this was a statewide question, so I'm hoping we'll get clarification on that. The other thing that's been brought up pretty blatantly is litigation. Where does that risk fall? Will that come back to the county as the permitting agency, or will that be involving, you know, the GSA? And there's many fledgling GSAs throughout the state that don't have the bandwidth, the funding to really have that defense against litigation. So those are two big points that I just really feel like need to be considered. So if Zach or Adam don't jump up to be part of this, I would volunteer to participate.
Beth.
Yeah, I want to support Devin's comments. This is really about agricultural wells. Devin had a great idea in the TAC, which I fully support, which is to have some sort of meeting or information available for the ag community. And I think we should expand that into a conversation to get feedback from the agricultural community on, you know, their perspective of this process. So as we develop this process, I want to remind everyone, the GSA is not a well permitting authority. It is not, this executive order does not put that responsibility onto the GSA. It's not changing the way things are right now. What it's doing, the intent, is to add another step of communication, recognizing that within the permitting authority's jurisdiction, there is now an agency that is focusing on groundwater sustainability. It's so that permitting authority can consult with the GSA. The GSA then makes a determination at some level, which we're still determining what level, whether this permit of this well, whether the installation of this well would negatively impact what the GSA has been, has planned, what, the constraints of the plan. Is it going to alter the water budget greatly? If you put in a huge well in an area that's, under suspected depletion, what's it going to do? So it's a letter of recommendation. It does not put the authority on the GSA. The county still makes the decision, being the well permitting authority, and it can not take the advice of the GSA. So this is what's going to be important for the GSA to have its own legal counsel. I'm working with Aqua to work with other GSAs and the legislative support team there to figure this out. We need to keep communicating, and I think we just don't have enough information yet to make any major decisions.
Thank you for that, Beth. I would just add, the environmental health in the county do have the authority to require hydrologic studies, because they do that all the time in the coastal development zone. So that's not something that I'm encouraging, but I just want you to know that. And then the other issue is monitoring requirements as to whether or not going forward every well should have some way of monitoring if it's not too expensive, so that we're sure as we put another well in, particularly if it's a new one, not so much existing wells that might need replacement or fixing, but if it's a brand new well, we may want to require some water elevation monitoring. So Adam, you have your hand up next.
Yeah, I just was going to tell Devin that I would help her do that, to do outreach and put together a meeting with stakeholders, with ag stakeholders.
Okay, so we have Devin, Beth, and Adam are interested in working on this. Is that correct? Did I sign my volunteers up?
I didn't realize I had volunteered. I think the thing that Devin and Adam and I are talking about is a good first step. And then I think the information that we can bring back will, and continue to work with Eric on it, will help to formulate a process.
I think you're right. I think that's a smart idea, is for us to have kind of a stakeholder meeting and talk about it and see, kind of take the temperature of what our community wants to do. Because I mean, it's also in their interest. If you don't want to end up with your water levels dropping to where your well is sucking air. And if you're in a situation where you're concerned about that, if someone's planning a new big ag well, because they no longer are going to be, say, like doing a diversion from surface water, I'm sure people would weigh in on that and have some concern. So that I think that this would be a good place to start.
Chair McGordy, just a quick, we have about 10 minutes if you would like to move on to another topic after 10 minutes.
Yeah, are we covered with this so far, Devin?
Just really quickly, Glenn, I guess I would just say, since there's two overlapping sort of efforts here, we have, the Ukiah Valley GSA, but then we have the rest of the county, which is also covered in this order through, sort of where environmental health may be going. So far, I haven't heard the county bring an item forward through environmental health to look at changing policies and procedures for well permits. If that is going to happen, I would really encourage that to be a public process so we can get feedback on sort of what that's going to look like. So they're parallel tracking, but they're going to overlap.
I agree with you. If we have a community listening session, I'll encourage Marlena to be there from environmental health. And the other thing I can tell you, so far I've had a little bit of internal discussion with her and also with Christian Curtis, and we're thinking, like a lot of other permitting processes, the permit is routed, and we would have essentially a checklist of concerns and have the ability to weigh in and make comments. And the question is, how do we handle that? Is that done at a meeting? Is it done by Eric as our staff and me, or what do we do? So these are things that we have to start building a process. I'm also kind of hoping that that we hear more from the state. So what they think is going on. Of course, Eric's got his ears to the rail a little bit, and I suspect that Amir does as well. So and Don, anybody who's hearing information, hopefully we can share and figure out what to do. The CEQA thing concerns me because the county's capacity to take on a big CEQA project is not great. And, it almost, we'd have to refer that outside. And I'm kind of tired of the state kicking CEQA down to county levels for things that are state mandates. We're dealing with that with cannabis right now. That's a disaster. And I really wouldn't voluntarily do that to us, just so you know where I stand. Beth?
I wanted to say we don't have our tribal representative from the board here today, but we do have our TAC tribal representative, Javier Silva. And I want to make sure, especially after reading the communication and outreach report, which we'll go over later, I want to make sure that we're reaching out and giving a voice to our tribal representatives and our colleagues there. So Glenn, would you be willing to ask Javier if he has any input on this and how we could incorporate the tribal communities in this?
Absolutely. Javier, any thoughts right now?
Yeah, thank you guys. This is the first I've seen the executive order, so I haven't really had time to on it, but and I will read it. So I'm not sure how it will affect impact the tribes, but as far as and I guess we're talking about it later, the outreach engagement, but you know, I can go into that more regarding the tribes, but of course, you know, the tribes have been disadvantaged and capacities are needed there as well. So just want to echo that. I could talk about that later too.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I know, again, that I'm not certain how many tribes are actually inside of our GSA. I'm not positive about that because I know that some of the rancherias are kind of on the edge of the aquifer. So that's something we should know. And if you have an environmental officer or someone who is working on environmental issues for the different groups, it would be great to hear back from them.
Yeah, and through my capacity, I'm able to facilitate a lot of that because I do tribal engagement for the North Coast Resource Partnership, and I am working with those tribes closely. I do work primarily for Ukiah tribe, which is, you know, in the basin. Mm-hmm. There's about 6 tribes, I think. Can't remember, but there's about 5 to 6 tribes.
Yeah, Ukiah is definitely inside of the basin. So they're my neighbors, and I've talked to them, and they have a nice well, so I'm sure they're concerned about it. Al?
I still have my hand up too, Glenn.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to add to Javier's comments. There's ML STEP, which is the Mendocino Lake Sonoma Environmental Protection Professionals Group. I've attended there before, Javier. I'm very happy to work with ML STEP to go over the executive order and provide feedback to the GSA if that would be helpful. And I'll contact you and Terry on that.
Yeah, that's a good form of communicating.
Hey, Al, do you?
Yeah, so, you know, the ad hoc committee will engage on this topic, but I think that it's important that the board at least give some minimal level of guidance as to how they want that engagement. And I don't know what the rest of the members think on this, but in my view, this should be a light touch. This shouldn't be a deep dive. We've got plenty of stuff in our GSP that is going to require a lot of effort and time and expense, really. And this is something that got just plopped out here. And yes, it is something that we are going to have to engage in, but I don't want us to get into the weeds too heavy on this. I think light touch is where I think this should be. I don't know. The rest of you need to give guidance if there's a guidance consensus on the board.
You know, I would agree with you on that, Al. I think there's enough for us to do. This was sort of thrust on us again by the state. And there's still, I have some real questions about, you know, what our aquifer actually looks like. I think where we run into trouble possibly is when we get onto some of the edges in terms of water yield and elevation. And those are the spots I'd be concerned with. But if we know the general aquifer area, and we can kind of use our best kind of native knowledge from existing wells, I agree with you that we shouldn't take an absolute control approach to dealing with future permits. Andy Rogers. Andy, you're on mute.
Hi, good morning. Did I have my hand up?
You did.
That was completely unintentional, but
Okay.
I'll use this opportunity to say good morning.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And who are you with?
So I'm supporting Eric and the West Coast team and the Valley Basin, and I manage the Santa Rosa Plain GSA. And so I will let you know while I have the floor that we are wrestling with the exact same things that you were talking about.
And did you reach any conclusions yet?
We have not. We're still looking at it as others have reported. We're paying close attention to other GSAs throughout the state and how they're all wrestling and trying to come up with the best idea, the simplest idea, the way that gets us to comply the easiest and protects the GSA.
Not to alarm you, but I just want you to know, in working with this commercial well extraction ad hoc, there are people in our community who think we shouldn't pump any water out of the ground at all, and agriculture shouldn't exist. And there are some real hard cases out there. So as we move forward, we have to be sure that we've got some good reasoning behind whatever decisions we make, so that we're not challenged.
Chair McGordy, just
Yes.
really quick, we should you do another 5 minutes if that's all right with you.
Okay, sounds good. Beth?
Thank you.
Well, on the next, is this, I can't see, the next slide, I think, is giving me an opportunity to go over the feedback from Aqua. I wondered if this was the right time.
Yes, please.
Great, thank you. So I think a lot of our GSA board members were listening into the TAC where I did review this. I did offer a staff report as well that covered what I felt were some of the most relevant issues from the recent Aqua conference to this particular GSA.
Beth, will you stop just a second? Tell us who Aqua is exactly. So
Aqua is the Association of California Water Agencies. I'm on the Region 1 board. It's an advocacy and lobbyist group for water agencies in California. We work really closely on legislation and enforcement and regulation, et cetera. And we had our spring conference last week. So we had a lot of the regulators were there presenting and we were able to have, individual discussions with them. On this executive order in its relationship to the GSAs, the overall intent is to provide tools to reduce the impact of the drought. So while the SIGMA is intended to have a longer term impact and not deal with the short-term drought response, the intensification of conditions by drought, it means that GSAs are being asked to step up and implement things a lot faster. One of the things I walked away with that I thought was the most important was this idea of being able to take advantage of winter flows, winter water as it comes this winter. So not waiting for 4 or 5 years to implement projects while we figure out where we are and do monitoring. We need to think of projects now to implement soon, as soon as it rains again, that will groundwater recharge, water banking, and including additional monitoring that then provides data for our model as well. So it's really just over and over again, I heard it's pushing up the timeline. Thankfully, we don't have issues like land subsidence and saltwater intrusion, but I would like to remind all the GSA board members that the Russian River is being watched very carefully across the state. And so it's really important to make sure that we're implementing the executive order points to some degree. While there is not direct enforcement, it will impact how and if we get funding. So we have that implementation grant coming up. And if we're not taking steps and implementing the executive order, then that will negatively impact our ability to obtain those grants. I would encourage everyone to read the staff report. The other thing I would really encourage everyone to do is watch the State Water Board May 10th meeting. There is a section on a SIGMA update. It doesn't deal directly with the executive order, but it does cover a great deal of the history and review and what would happen if the GSP basically isn't keeping up and the state has to step in. So it's really good to hear it right from the regulators what that would look like. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Beth. That was helpful. So Laurel.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Beth, did they say that they would suspend CEQA and all the permitting required to do all those projects in order to do them this winter? Because that would really be the only way one could do that.
Yeah, there is a lot of streamlining that was talked about. in the sessions I was in, I don't think it got into great detail. I would say Laura and Amir were both there. And I know Don Seymour from Sonoma was there. I don't know if Don's still on the meeting though. But
Don
maybe
is still
Laura
on the meeting. Yeah. Don, any comment?
and Laura and Amir as well.
Well, I mean, under the governor's proclamation right now, CEQA has been suspended for some of these types of projects. I don't, whether it's, specifically for this, but there is a suspension of CEQA while the emergency regulation is in place. And so it would streamline at least, I don't know if you could actually get a full project off, but certainly you could start, some pilot projects that could, inform whether, some of this on-farm recharge or flood mar might be an attractive approach for leveraging the flashiness of the Russian River.
It's interesting about CEQA. I mean, we don't file for CEQA every time we have a flood, and certainly that's a pretty major environmental impact, and that's basically what we'd be sort of synthesizing. So just a side. Okay, so next we're going to move on to drought condition discussion. So what are the board's concerns with the 2022 drought conditions? So that may already have adversely impacted our compliance with the GSP and SGMA. We'll be using an interactive tool to visualize this process. I'm going to turn this over to Eric and let him discuss how this is all going to work.
Thank you, Chair McGorty. For those who have not used this already, if you go to www.menti.com and you type in the code 41875965, it'll prompt you to put in 3 responses of 50 characters or less. It could be phrases or just a single word, and that will develop a word cloud. In the TAC meeting earlier, or the workshop portion, we invited everyone to participate, not just the TAC members. So Chair McGorty, that's up to you if you would like just the board members to participate in this, or if you would like the entire group.
So I would be happy for everyone to participate. The more information we have, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
So oh my God, we're going to have to minimize this window and then go to the website and actually join. Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, so you would either use your phone or your normal web browser on your computer, and you can go to menti.com and type in 41875965, and then it'll prompt you to enter in 3 different responses.
Eric, are you just wanting board members to do this?
Chair McGorty indicated he would like everyone to participate if they would like.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that.
So we'll give everybody a few minutes to attempt this.
Eric, would you repeat that URL?
Yes, it is www.menti, which is spelled MENTI.com. And the code is 41875965.
Let me repeat the code, 41875965. 65, thank you.
You're welcome. So the question is, what are the board's, or in this case, everyone's concerns with the 2022 drought conditions that may adversely impact our compliance with the GSP and SGMA? another minute of responses. Have all the board members inputted at least one response so far? Al, have you? Okay. Zach, have you? Adam?
Yes, I have.
Glenn?
I'm just getting there.
Just getting there? Okay, no problem. And then Doug, you're working on that now too?
Affirmative.
Okay, great. Okay, I think we can open up discussion now. Chair McGordy, if you would want to bring up a couple topics that you see there that strike you. The ones that you see that are the biggest are the ones that have been submitted the most times compared to the others. And so in this case, that'd be increased extraction and funding are the two that pop out.
Okay, so hold on, I'm a little bit lost here. Okay. So this is based on how big the letters are? Is that kind of what?
Is how many responses if there's been duplicate responses, they get bigger, or if there's been more than one response, they get bigger compared to the others, yes.
Okay.
And in this case, increased extraction.
Have a comment on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as the chair of the TAC, I do have some feedback from when we did the same thing this morning. So when you're ready, Glenn, I'm happy to share that. You may want to do a discussion on this first, I recognize.
Yeah, let's do a little discussion here. So we can see based on size, first of all, our group seems to be all over the place, but let's see if we can pull some of these together. So I said not worried yet, and I see someone else said overreaction. And then we have some people concerned about increased extraction as being our biggest concern, funding being a big concern, and then we can see where we have other ideas. Underperformance, not meeting thresholds. So some people think that we're slacking off here a little bit. So we don't seem to have a real clear, cohesive view as a group, in my opinion. And not that that's bad. That's partially why we have these discussions, is try to figure out, okay, if we had a second thought at this, is there anything that's sort of striking people's minds? Eric, do you want to help us out a little bit too? Because you've been through this process before and I haven't.
Yeah, sure.
This is like a stream of consciousness thing to me. It's like everything is just sort of popping out and people are thinking about it. And that's good but that's why we get groups together. And it's clear that we don't have groupthink going on here, that we're not all thinking exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and actually, I think this would be a great time for Beth to jump in and share. And I could also share the screenshot of what the TAC thought, if that is of interest.
Sure. And then maybe Beth can talk about what she thought with the TAC.
Yeah, generally the question that emerged was, what if we have another dry year? That was we were looking at compliance as well. That's the real key word here, is how are the current drought conditions going to impact our compliance with SGMA and our GSP? So we went through and had all the TAC members offer comments. And what came out of that was that as the drought continues, It will challenge the quality and quantity of water supply. The minimum thresholds may be too low in our GSP and they need to be re-examined. There's a lack of public awareness and demand reduction. And we need to be proactive and implement PMAs immediately that will take advantage of winter water supply. It's really interesting. It looks a little bit different than the board level responses. We didn't really have any comments about, overreaction or did we, Eric? I don't remember having any.
Yeah, the two that really stood out were minimum thresholds and just concerned about what if those will be triggered since they were not triggered recently, but they may be triggered this coming drought. And then funding was a mutual one that both the board and the TAC have mentioned today as a concern.
Yeah, well, the TAC is doing a little differently. I think that they're focused more on some of the technical aspects of the GSA, and we're focused a little bit more on policy as a board. So I think that those are our differences. So we use the TAC to inform us, and then we have to think about sort of the political ramifications of setting policies that might affect our constituents. So I think that it sort of makes sense. I see a little bit of a pattern there. So since we have Laura on the line, so Laura, what are some of the thresholds? When do we hit the panic button as a GSA? What would make us worry?
Oh, that's a good question, Glenn. Thank you. No, so I would like to point out that as has been mentioned also during the TAC meeting, we are really close to the threshold that we have highlighted in the GSP. I would like to point out something which is important. If you remember, in our GSP, we really had only a few long-term data available. So that was a huge data gap. So basically, before 2014, there were only 4 points where data were collected. And I think this is really important and needs to be included in the thinking and in the analysis of what we can see now. So we don't know much about what happened in the past, and we know something about how the system reacts, and but it's still like in many areas of the basin we have really not a good idea of what's going on, and that's why we suggested all the new data collection. So the threshold, we got really, really close in the past year, the water year 2021. We will see what happens this coming year. I think what it's really important is the message that was coming from Beth and that we really grasped about at Aqua, which is the suggestion considering how the climate is really moving forward is not to sit too much, because if you wait and you lose the good winter that you could use for project, you may not have one of those good winters for 3 or 4 years, because this is pretty much what's happening right now. So my main suggestion is to really think about what can we do to get something on the ground, even as a pilot, but with something as soon as possible, so that we can combine the data that we are collecting with some action, which is important, and see really how everything is moving forward. So I mean, in terms of threshold, I really would couch whatever we see right now with the fact that even in the GSPs, we said this threshold needs to be revised probably in 5 years as soon as we have more data. If you remember the way we described the minimum threshold, and this was really because for some locations, we really couldn't say much. So this is my kind of my suggestion, seeing how things are going right now. And this coming year might be as bad as the past year, who knows? Remember that we were using the spring data as our trigger to tell us how the rest of the year was going to look like. And this spring was not really great. So because obviously there was not much precipitation last winter. So we have to, I think it's really telling us that we need to start thinking about the next step and some action. And I agree with Don earlier was saying about CEQA and some streamlining of project implementation because we are in the emergency condition. I think we need to take advantage. I mean, some projects, I'm not saying that really, just by my own experience everywhere else, I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's easier just because of the condition in which we are.
So the first thing I think to look at is how much water comes out of the underground basin in a year, and that gives a sense of how much we got to put back in, and that would help us design some of the activities that we do for recharge. So if we're taking out 8,000 or 9,000 acre feet from the basin, then that gives us a sense of that's how much needs to go back in. And then we have to start thinking about, okay, where are good points for recharge? Which is something I don't completely understand. I think we can recharge some of the shallower aquifers possibly, but the deeper ones, I'm not positive how all the water gets there. So, because we've got aquatards in between them. So these are some of the things that technically we probably have to work on. So Sean, just looking at, or Don could answer this question too. So for deep aquifer recharge, what's the standard procedure? I know that it's done. Don?
I'll defer to Don.
Okay.
And Chair McGorty, just really quick, if we could do another 5 minutes
Okay.
and then go to the next agenda item, that would be great.
Don, are you still with us? Mission creep. Okay.
Otherwise, Glenn, I can provide something about what you said.
Yeah.
And so basically there is for sure a connection between the shallow aquifer and the lower aquifer. We just don't know exactly where that's happening. I hope that the geophysical data that DWR is collecting maybe will give us a first ideas of how the subsurface is looking like. But then even when we wrote the grant for with the idea of doing some pilot groundwater recharge, we were suggesting to do some little exploration. We don't need much, and we don't really something very expensive, but to understand how the geology looks like and what are the locations where eventually you can have percolation down to the deep aquifer. At the same time, what I'm hearing more and more is we need to remember that this groundwater recharge can be multi-benefit, in the sense that some of the recharge that stays in the shallow aquifer, it's also true that can help with recharge in the streams. Some of the recharge is percolating down. So we have a double benefit just doing this type of floodman recharge. And that's going to, maybe it means that the deeper aquifer is not recharged completely with all what you put in, but it's still providing some positive impact. And I think, in principle, you can also think about, I think in Sonoma, and I don't know if Don is back. Anyway, they do some of these aquifer storage recovery with some injection wells. That's something that somebody is also considering. Maybe in terms of doing something quick, something like AgMar, FloodMar, it's much easier to implement in terms of a pilot. So we can even get started with something like that and then design. And once we have a better understanding of how the aquifer look like, then we can move into something more expensive, with more permits required and everything else. So we can maybe do a step approach.
I know that Los Angeles Metropolitan Water District does a lot of groundwater recharge. So when they have good water year, they're filling up their groundwater basins in multiple places. And I don't know what all is entailed in that. And I suspect that should be one of the strategies, as well as surface water diversion. So, Sean.
There are places in Southern California that do recharge literally every day of the year. Like if you look at the spreading basins in the greater Los Angeles County area, those are really the foundation of an entire district. And that is what they do literally every day.
And what's their water source?
They use a combination of high winter flows and reclaimed water and other things. And it's used both for banking supply and also combating seawater intrusion.
Okay. So we should probably be thinking of a strategy for our basin based on that. Beth.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what they're doing in other places in the state, but I think we're really small. We don't have a lot of money and we don't have huge problems either. I think we just need to get smart and on a grassroots sort of level, look at how we can take advantage of the high winter flows and most effectively bank that water for extraction in the summer. And I just don't want to take too big of a bite. This board has repeatedly shared its concerns about funding and fees and taking on too much. And I'm looking at these responses. We have a really wide spectrum of overreaction and we're not reacting quickly enough. We need to focus on finding a middle ground and doing something manageable for our size of GSA. I don't think we need to do like huge, massive projects. We have land, we have high winter flows. When it does rain, we can use that water. We need to work on coordination with one another, build trust and relationships, work on projects together.
Thank you. Don.
Yeah, I would just like to, back up what Beth has said, and also Laura. I think there is low-hanging fruit that these flood type projects. I really agree with Laura that and Beth that these bigger projects of aquifer recharge and recovery do need a much deeper dive to understand the geology, the hydrogeology. In our region, Sonoma, Mendocino counties, likely large spreading basins. Really, the geology is not really conducive to that. It's more would be like using wells to inject and then recover, and that takes a lot of investigation to really understand that system and how it would work. So I again just really support the thought of looking at moving forward with an on-farm recharge. Yes, you have land, but you don't have land that's not being used. So you want to leverage those agricultural lands where potentially flooding using existing infrastructure. So you already have either diversions that are in the river or wells that are diverting underflow. Most of these ranches have frost protection systems that could be used, to pull that hot, those elevated winter flows and apply it to land. So, like I said, we are moving forward with these type of projects in the Alexander Valley as we speak. We'd be happy to coordinate with the TAC, Beth, and Laura's team on what we're doing and how it might play. And Laura is an expert. She's had a number of projects where she's already deeply involved in applied application of FloodMAR.
Okay, so let's see. We'll have Doug and then followed by Devin.
I mentioned this during the TAC. The sanitation, the perk ponds at the sewer treatment plant. The city has data on what sort of volumes wound up perking. There's quite a bit of area there in terms of the footprint. And it's something that already exists. Is it large enough to do all of what we're contemplating or will contemplate? I doubt that, but it could be a good beginning. It's simply a matter of collecting water and getting it there and having it be clean enough that it doesn't plug up the soil, the gravels. The city has, those ponds have been in operation for well, since the mid-50s, I guess.
So Devin, before we get to you, we'll let Sean answer since he's kind of involved. So Sean?
Yeah, we do have those facilities, and especially in dry years like this, they are underutilized because we're producing a lot of recycled water now. But what would limit us there is we don't have a water right that would allow us to flood them.
So I'm wondering if that's something that we should work on an emergency basis with State Water Resources Control Board.
That could be something we could consider. We certainly have the ability to divert water there. We just don't have a right.
Okay. All right, now we'll go to Devin.
So just a couple of things. I'd be interested to see, Dawn, how the projects go forward in Alexander Valley. I think there's definitely some concern, depending upon locations and things within the agricultural community about timing and impacts to existing vines or trees, access issues. So I think all of those questions and appropriate locations would have to be addressed. The one point I wanted to bring up to see if anybody was more aware, I did see a notice that came from the Regional Water Quality Control Board a few weeks back regarding, sort of an expansive look within the region of groundwater recharge types of projects for water quality concerns. And so I don't know if that's going to be something we'll need to look at as well in this process.
Okay. Beth, and then Sean.
Yeah, Devin, I actually read through that document you were talking about, and I agree. There's a lot going on there. I think we need to liaise with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, but there does seem to be, in their draft resolution, it does seem to be a strong intent to move those projects along and support them. So I think we need to take advantage of that. And then to Sean and Doug's comments, this is what I'm talking about, this collaboration and cooperation. So the city has space, the flood control district has a water right. Sounds like we need to have a conversation there and see if we can put to beneficial use rights that we have here, collaborating more.
I like that. So Laurel?
Under this grant that we have from Department of Conservation, we've been looking for some of these projects, and one of them that has popped up is using the old reservoirs up on Mill Creek to store water, then release it after the flood, and it'll recharge all along through the alluvial fan. However, I don't know very much about the gates on that reservoir, but it is owned by the county. So if every time we had a big rain event after the flood peak passes, we could, drain the reservoir until the next one comes, you could kind of recharge over the whole season. Now it is used for recreation, so I don't know how that would interrupt the recreational use, but I don't think the recreational use is going to be in the middle of the winter probably.
Mm-hmm.
But
people go fishing up there. That's its principal use from what I've seen is that. So we probably couldn't completely drain it, but we could certainly drop the levels. And I imagine I can find out probably from Howard Dashiell. We'll probably have an idea of who manages the ponds. I know that we did have an issue with the valves not working, and when they drained it at one point, then Fish and Wildlife didn't want to let them put water back in because they had a disagreement about whether that pond should even be there because of some water right issue. So we'd have to be very careful about doing anything with that.
Yeah, it's just a storage reservoir that hasn't got a consumptive use. So those are the kind of things that you might be able to quickly use to do some recharge. I also want to say that I think Devin and I could talk to growers about turning on their frost sprinklers, and see if they might be willing to do that after a big flood goes by or something like that. Because you want to wait till the flood has stopped, I think.
Right. It's pretty. You can't really have your pumps in the river when, at least I can't, when there's lots of water going by, because it'll tend to go over the top of my pump and that'll be the end of it for a while. Right. So we have to be a little careful about that. And some of us, it'd be awkward to have to move the pump in and out, but it still could happen during a period of high flow if there's a window. So,
yeah.
Amber?
Chair McGordy, if I could jump in really quick. I would like to offer a time check. There are a couple of agenda items that do require a vote, so I want to just make sure we can accommodate those. However, this is a tremendously informative discussion, so I do not want to take away from that.
Okay, so we'll go with a couple more speakers and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. So Amber, do you have any insight on the Mill Creek ponds?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. So I've done the water rights reporting for the last couple of years, and we currently don't have water rights to draft water except for firefighting. Our water rights currently are for recreation and habitat. So I don't know what the process is to get water rights, or even if it's even a possibility to get water rights at this point, but that's the current situation.
Okay. Don, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up just a bit on the flood mar. What I was suggesting is really just, you know, one or two very small pilot studies, just to look at the, you know, how the possibility, how existing infrastructure could be leveraged. And, you know, this would entail, you know, there would have to be, you know, a monitoring system in place to understand what the benefit of applying the water is. You know, if you just apply the water and basically 2 weeks later, it's moved right back in the river, you know, there's really no benefit to it. You know, there really needs to be a demonstration that if you apply water in February and March, it's really still there in July, August, and September when you really want to start pulling it. So it's really more of a, you know, let's do a, you know, look at the potential for one or two pilot studies to look at the efficacy in your region.
Well, thanks for those comments. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to our next agenda item. Where are we right now? So
we would be on 3B, and if I may provide a suggestion, if you would like to reevaluate the agenda and reshuffle the order, I would suggest after 3B that we prioritize going to 3F and 3G and 3H after that, in the interest of time, just in case if we run out of time.
So the next part is we'll discuss our GSP implementation grant opportunity. We'll discuss PMAs that were identified in GSP and provide feedback on priority ranking. So Eric, you want to help us on this a bit?
Yes, I would like to invite Beth to discuss briefly on what the TAC discussed earlier this morning in relation to the Mentimeter that we use to get people's thoughts on the PMAs that we evaluated this morning.
Thanks, Eric. So after we had this discussion about what are the current drought impacts, we transitioned very quickly into what can we do, what projects and management actions should we start implementing now in response to the drought, and into, you know, considering the implementation grant that will be opening at the end of this year, early next year, which, you know, could cover basic operations of the GSA, which I think we'll probably all be in support of. But additionally, what project and management actions do we really need to look at right now? I want to, as you look at this slide, there was a list of options to choose from. It wasn't something we could type in. And most people had the feeling that the options, or voiced their opinion that the options in the survey did not provide enough choices or any choices for projects that would be taking advantage of winter water this coming winter. So that was a bit of a constraint. It was that just kind of the way the conversation went before. So a lot of discussion about recharge and water banking, continuing the current monitoring and expanding monitoring through implementation of some of these projects. And that also provides data to refine the model, which supports our 5-year update for sure. Public awareness came up, and I'm really summarizing what was said, but there was a discussion about, like, what is it we want out of public awareness? Efficiencies, improvements, demand reductions? Are we looking at habit changes? Like, do we really need lawns when we're having a third year of drought? I was thinking about, general drought mitigation strategies. I know we have a PMA that addresses that. So overall, I think my take on it was that we need longer term proactive projects or management actions. We need to think about proactive long-term impacts of climate change and then in Potter Valley project inflow changes. But also we need to find some projects that we can implement quickly on a grassroots level, not a lot of complication like we've been talking about in the previous agenda item. And any of these whatever projects the board decides to move forward with, really enhancing the monitoring aspect of those and incorporating monitoring and outreach. I think we can always include public awareness in any project that's being done, increase the communication with all our partners, and really bring that into the public eye. And that would kind of incorporate those two concerns across the board.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like we're already headed down the outreach and education road, that we do want to have a public meeting with our stakeholders, at least our agricultural stakeholders. And I think that's good. We probably should have a more general meeting that would also take other stakeholders in, like urban water users, to discuss groundwater and how water is presently being used in the community, because I don't think a lot of people know that. And I would say for urban use, the same thing I say for our agricultural uses, we have to plan on conservation. We have to really start redesigning our vineyards differently to use less water, which is possible, just by using different rootstocks, and kind of move away from that idea that was kind of put on us by Napa Valley in the 1990s, that what we needed was to emulate the French with these little dinky rootstocks and small plants. And that's not a good strategy for a deeply Mediterranean climate with not much water. So we have to start thinking more like the south of France or parts of Italy and Greece, where their vineyards are designed differently. So those are just examples. So just, I'm not quite sure what to do at this point, Eric. Should we just discuss briefly, the one project that came up that seems most feasible for us is using the recharge basins that we have already existing at the city of Ukiah and trying to implement that. Sean, is there monitoring going around very close to those basins where we might be able to follow up on what's happening after we go through a recharge event?
Yeah, we have a battery of groundwater monitoring around there. They're all required for our MVDS permit and our recycled water permit. The real news there, though, is that the water table in that area is not really very low in the first place. So I'm not sure what it will show from those wells, but we do have a very detailed old hydrologic study that shows that they do recharge groundwater. Like I said, what we're lacking is a right, and I'm not sure the flood controls right would cover it either, but I'm certainly willing to talk about it.
Okay, well, we could put that as a potential project. It sounds like you already have quite a lot of information on it based on past practices and monitoring. And I'm just wondering if there's other areas. One of the places that I think about is the vineyard in the area near Maverick Capsules. Underneath that is quite a gravel strata. And at one point they were thinking of taking the gravel out, and that would be another potential recharge area that could be used. Sean?
We also have a large area that we looked at with Larry Walker that's part of a Riverside Park that actually was our old wastewater plant. And that's a really easy place to either just connect with the river and wet it during storm flows and other things. And it's one of the PMAs actually in the GSP as well. That's another easy one.
Okay, so we have a couple of easy recharge projects that we could potentially do.
One thing, if I can suggest, is I can go through the grant slides, and then that can inform our discussion that we're having right now on potential projects to be projects we can consider including for the grant.
Okay, Sean, any other comments before we get started on that? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. Sorry.
Okay, your hand was up. I was just curious. All right. Go ahead, Eric.
Great, thank you so much. So in terms of the grants, DWR is going to be issuing out the round 2 Sigma implementation grants in the near future. And there's a couple aspects that I want to point out. The first is that they're pushing the open solicitation for it to later this year to even maybe into the beginning of next year. So that allows the GSA time to consider projects to include into the grant and what projects are the high priority to allocate our resources and time at the GSA level directly right now with the funds that we may want to use to get projects started, but also what projects we want to prioritize relying on the grants to push along further. There's two important aspects about the grants that have been learned. The first is that in some grants, they require a cost sharing from a GSA or an entity that's applying for the grant. In this case, they're not requiring a cost share, which could be a major benefit for this GSA. So therefore, we're not required to provide matching funds in a cost share to be able to be eligible and apply for the grant. So that's a major plus. A second thing is that there is funding being specifically set aside for underrepresented communities and also for severely disadvantaged communities, which is another important aspect to keep in mind. Who's eligible? Essentially, it's the GSA. The GSA is eligible, and they're asking, there's only one application per basin. And so the GSA can submit an application on behalf of all its member agencies, including the tribes and NGOs and others that are included and that are members of the GSA. In terms of what would be accounted for in a grant, what activities are eligible, revisions and updates or modifications to the GSP are eligible. Capital improvement activities that are listed within the GSP are eligible, which includes all the PMAs, whether the lead agency is the city of Ukiah or the GSA or some other member agency that's the lead. All of those projects would be eligible for being applied for in the grant. One important note that DWR indicated at the Aqua conference is that they prefer that we do not include normal GSA administration costs to keep the GSA running. They prefer that if you do include GSA administration costs, that they're more related to the GSA administration directly towards managing the grants when you get a grant and the funds related to managing those projects. That was an important note and distinction because that contradicts the documentation they currently have out right now. And I think the reason for that DWR is coming from is that they would like the GSAs to prioritize getting projects funded versus just getting their normal operations funded.
Eric, do you know what's allowable for overhead and administration?
From their comments, what they have alluded to is that overhead administration related to managing the grants, the GSP implementation grant, and whatever time is needed to oversee that process, those projects go moving forward. But when it comes to just meetings, TAC meetings, et cetera, those types of functions are what I think they're hoping that people steer away from. And they're hoping that the GSAs would be self-sufficient to facilitate those pieces of their function. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide because it's actually better if I just pull up the next part of this, which is really what we're aiming for this discussion is on the grants. And from the discussion, this really great discussion we just had about priority projects we can get off the ground really quickly, and then what can we consider for the grants itself. So the first question I would like to pose using Mentimeter, and this could be, again, something, Glenn, Chair McGordy, that you can invite everyone to participate in, or if you'd like it just to be the board. But posing this question, does this grant opportunity seem like a good fit for the GSA to consider pursuing? And then after we talk about that, we can jump into opening up what projects may be important to prioritize.
I think it'd be great for all to participate.
Wonderful. So again, it's going to be the same link, www.menti.com, and you would use the same code, which is 41875965, and it should direct you to either responding yes or no. Considering the amount of votes that we have right now, I'm going to ask Chair McGordy, did you vote?
I did.
Chair White, did you vote?
Yes.
Chair Gasca, did you vote?
Yes.
Chair Mr. Crane, did you vote?
I did.
Great. So I think that's an overwhelming yes. Grants, this particular grant application opportunity could be beneficial to the GSA to consider pursuing. So we appreciate that. And Glenn, I'll bounce this back to you. If we can spend 10 minutes on discussing what potential projects that we may have already discussed that might be priority projects to consider for the grant, I'll open that up to you.
Well, I need a little help on this too from the other board members. So first of all, just going back to what ground we covered, Amber, we did do a study or a discussion on ways that we might fund the agency. Is that correct?
We did, yeah. I have to refresh my memory on everything we did. It's been so long, but
I know.
The outcome of all our financial discussions was that we planned to do a rate and fee study to look at, because there's several different options in terms of who gets charged a tax or a fee and how it's assessed and things like that. So that was sort of the next step from my memory in what we needed to do.
Mm-hmm. So, we only get to do one project. We have to think about what's the best use of what's the best bang for our buck here. So that's why I'm bringing up that as an issue we still haven't solved. Beth, any thinking on that?
Yeah, Amber and I worked really closely on that. I believe that we budgeted for a well inventory and fee study to happen before the implementation grant was available, because we all recognize that was something we need to get on quickly to fund the GSA. So Eric, can you confirm that's, I know we have the budget item on a different item, but is that still available?
We did that. We included it in our our 5-year planning budget.
Yeah.
I think we put $100,000 in there.
For the first
that was, we did that though before we had information that it could be covered by the implementation grant. So,
So I guess the question is whether the board wants to wait the fee study or to pay for it and get it implemented more quickly, which had been the original intention of the board.
Okay, any thoughts on that? Anybody? I'm curious, Don, what's happening in Sonoma County with your GSAs? How are you going to pay for that down there? Has that been determined yet?
As Andy Rogers can attest, we are painfully going through that process right now to determine. I think things are a little bit further along in the Santa Rosa Plain, but in Sonoma Valley and in Petaluma Valley, where there's a lot smaller user group, the fees are much higher in those two basins, and in the Santa Rosa Basin, where there's a much larger group to spread the fee structure out. I think they're pretty far along in getting that going. Am I right, Andy?
Yeah, that's correct. Santa Rosa Plain actually adopted a fee methodology in 2019. And so right now the direction is to utilize that structure in the Santa Rosa Plain with updated inputs, better groundwater database, and new costs. But yes, Don's exactly right. There's more people in the Santa Rosa Plain, so the fee with the costs in each basin are roughly the same. So spreading it out over fewer people in the other basins makes it much more expensive. So lots of discussion.
So what's kind of the range of costs that people are likely to be paying in this Santa Rosa Plain?
It depends on the category of user. The one that is kind of the most focused on is the rural resident, because that is a large component of all three basins. And in the Santa Rosa Plain, it's looking like around $25 a year, whereas in the other basins, Petaluma Valley, I think, is roughly 10 times that. And Sonoma Valley's, I think, is about 4 or 5 times that. So there's the inequity between is one of the discussion items, and if there's a way to normalize between, and so a lot of creative thinking going on.
Okay, let's see, Chelsea Spear.
Hi, I just wanted to say you might want to be a little bit careful and check in with our grant program about fee study being an eligible project. I'm not 100% one way or another, but I know with like our facilitation support program, there are some like weird nuances where we're not supposed to be providing maybe like legal assistance, and the fee studies fall into that kind of category. So I just wanted to put that out there to double check before you go too far down that path.
Okay, thank you for that. That's good admonition here. Let's see, Beth.
I'd like to defer to Director White first.
Okay, Al.
Yeah, I think that, we have definitely established that finding a way to fund this thing is a priority. And we put that into our budget that we're self-funding. So, I think we just continue to do that and conclude that as soon as we can. As far as applying for a grant with these opportunities, I think we should be looking at something that will maximize our data collection, because that's our biggest problem is we lack sufficient data. So we should be looking at what are our big gaps and how can we plug them, even if even if it's just we're asking for money to install monitoring or whatever. We just need to ask to utilize this to start filling in the hole that we have, because until we have more data, we're just kind of flying blind on a lot of this stuff.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Beth.
Yeah, I'm glad I let Al go first. That was great, Al. So I agree with Al. I think we need to go forward with the fee study as the board budgeted and decided on earlier, and to use the implementation grant to address some of the bigger issues that have been brought up. But it occurs to me as I read through the PMA list and in our plan, it would really be good to know what PMAs are happening among the GSA members and other stakeholders already. Like, do an assessment, like what's actually happening already? Where are we on some of these? Have they been started? Are they still relevant? And come up with kind of like a list of a checklist, like, does it include maximizing data collection? Is there a component for outreach, et cetera? So it feels like, not that I'm volunteering, but it feels like there's another working group here that could come together and, or maybe Eric, and kind of figure out where are we on these and which ones rise to the top as being the best options, and then bring maybe a few of those, like a select 3 or 4 of those options to the board. There's a lot of options in our GSP. I don't know if they can be combined, for example. These are things I think we really need to get into the weeds about, and isn't going to happen in a meeting today.
Yeah, and if I may offer, Chairman McGordy, we have 30 minutes left planned. I would suggest we conclude discussion and then move on to agenda items 3F, 3G, and 3H as they require votes and motions to approve. And then we can discuss what items we can move to the next meeting if we do not have enough time.
Okay. Quickly, Laura, do you have a point to make?
No, I just think that I appreciate that there is no thinking about this, and everybody agrees that this implementation plan is important. The only point that I would like to make is we may have to think about some other options, because this funding will be available late 2023, which means it will be even too late for thinking about using winter of 2023-2024. So if there is a way, some kind of easy, low-hanging fruit that some of the GSA members may have in mind, there are some other fundings that might be happening sooner than these ones that would help us at least getting started with, like Don was saying earlier, with a pilot project to start thinking about specific location, and it doesn't have to be a lot of funding in terms of construction. I really don't want to spend money for construction without knowing what it's really effective, but something easy to start getting the data and the information that we may need to design than something a little bigger. So I just want to point that out, because I'm a little worried that funding arriving end of 2023, it means that the first opportunity is going to be winter 2024, 2025, and then the GSP update is a year after. So just want to put things in perspective eventually. I know that the only thing I want to point out, and maybe Dominic or you guys can correct me, the implementation grant can be retroactive, and if you start something before in terms of projects, you can include that. And this is the information that I got somewhere else, but just in case.
Dominic?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out 2 things. So one, the eligible costs use the concurrent drawdown method, and I'm pulling this from the PSP, but it says that it's done through reimbursement. So I just want to point that out. And then Laura, to your point, there is also language in the PSP that says that eligible reimbursable costs are those that were incurred by the grantees after the date of 2021 guidelines in PSP being approved.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is correct. And then, sorry, one last thing. I know you're short on time, but if you have questions, SGWP, again, that's sgwp@water.ca.gov is the place to email for that specific grant. And if possible, please CC me just so I can keep in the loop with you all as well and follow up if, and try to be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we probably better move on, huh, Eric, in order to try to be as complete as we can today.
I would suggest that, and we prioritize agenda items 3F, 3G, and 3H. And then if we have any time left over, we can discuss any items that we may be able to get to. And if not, we can defer them to the next meeting. And luckily, by design, those other items could easily be discussed at the next meeting in June. So.
Okay, so item F, LWA on-call services contract for fiscal year 22-23. So we'll discuss a proposal LWA for on-call services contract. Board will provide feedback and recommend action here. So who wants to field that, Laura or Amir?
I'm not sure, because I think this is I think we understood that there is some ongoing work that needs to keep going, even if the grant, because the grant will be submitted at the end of the year. So, and this ongoing work might be like supporting you with some of the meetings sometimes, providing some of the GSP feedback, and mostly working on the data that we are still collecting and analyzing, like what we did for the annual report. And so the idea was to have some kind of a tool for you guys to call us when questions come up and when there is the need for us to provide the GSP perspective and provide you suggestion with what we think might be also what might be good to include in the implementation grant, so that we really keep following what was in the original GSP and really move forward from there. And I don't know if Eric or Amber, you guys brought up the contracts.
Yeah, so the other purpose of this is to allow continuity with LWA to support the GSA. That's the primary purpose. And then in terms of budget, since that could be something that the board would like to know more about, we do have budget to accommodate this contract, and we will discuss the budget further at the next board meeting. And so this on-call service contract is for $25,000 to provide a variety of different services, as Laura mentioned. And that's pretty much the gist of this contract. And if there's any questions or comments that may have come up in your review, we can discuss those before we move to the potential vote.
Al.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the proposed LWA on-call contract for fiscal year 22-23.
And second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to approve the contract. Is there any further discussion? And I just want to ask this question because I'm just wondering. So Eric, is this also services that West Yost could provide if we weren't working with Larry Walker and Associates?
Under a current contract with West Yost for the GSA administration services, these services are separate from what we would be doing and what LWA will be doing. The only thing that is not called out with LWA here, or that's in our contract, but there's no funds currently allocated towards it right now, would be grants proposal support. But other than that, their services are quite differently defined than what we are doing to support the GSA.
Okay, not that I'm looking to create, conflict here, but I did just long term as we're growing and developing. We want to keep our options open. But that being said, obviously, we've worked really well with Larry Walker and Associates, and they've gotten us to this point. So, I personally support working with them. So it's been moved and seconded to approve this contract. Shall we have a call for a vote? So.
Director Crane?
Aye.
Director White?
Aye.
Director Robinson?
Gasca, aye.
That's right. I'm sorry. Let me make a note of that. Chair McGorty?
Yes?
Okay, the motion carries with 4 ayes.
Okay, well, thank you, Sabrina. So, all right, moving on to our next agenda item.
3G.
Okay, so RFP on GSA legal counsel services for fiscal year 22-23. We'll discuss a proposed RFP for GSA legal counsel services. Board will provide feedback for these services. And let's have a discussion. Are there any candidates out there that we know of that we could work with? And more important than that is what kind of services do we specifically need? Is this a kind of a retainer thing where we have somebody on hand, or?
Yes. Previous history on this is that over the past year, the GSA board and staff have expressed the desire to retain legal counsel to avoid any potential conflicts of interest with the county counsel serving in this role currently. And so that's the reason why this has been brought up today, to issue an RFP. In terms of potential candidates, there are a couple of firms that I know of, but also that Andy Rogers knows of, that may be likely candidates to consider this RFP. And once this is publicly noticed out to the bidding world and allowing people to see this, we would go and talk to those firms and tell them about this public RFP that's gone out and encouraging them to consider this. The main components of the RFP outline that the legal counsel would attend board meetings and provide counsel when requested. They would also attend TAC meetings and provide counsel when requested. And then they would attend monthly check-in calls with myself being the general manager to address any immediate concerns that might come up or any items that we are working on together, to work through any legal issues or to get their input on any issues that we would like to discuss. And the primary item that I could see coming up early on is the need to discuss more on the executive order, but also how we continue moving forward after the executive order and coordinating with county environmental health and the permitting. And so that is the gist of the contract. And the structure of it would be that they would be on retainer for 3 years to attend board TAC meetings and also monthly check-in calls, to be able to provide those counsel services where we may need them to provide their input.
Do you have an estimated cost based on experience with other GSAs?
Yeah, we got some estimated costs just around ballpark from a couple different groups that have a similar arrangement, and it would range anywhere between 10 to 20K per year, assuming that they just attend the meetings, they attend the TAC meetings, and then they check the monthly check-in calls. So that should be a general ballpark. And then in terms of budget, we do have budget to accommodate for that amount, between 10 and 20,000.
Board discussion, any thinking? Al?
Yeah, we obviously need that service as a backstop. And I would hope that we wouldn't need to have our hand held the whole way through. But it was really when an issue would arise that would require that kind of involvement. So, you know, I think this is fine as long as we don't overuse it.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? Devin?
I was going to sort of piggyback on what Director White said. It may be good at some point to designate a specific point of contact, you know, so you don't rack up the bills with, you know, various entities, you know, emailing. It's amazing what an email can cost you in the legal world. So it just might be good. And I know you guys are thinking about that, but it may be Eric working with the chair of the TAC and yourself, Chair McGorty, or whomever. But if, you know, having a single point of contact and only using it when necessary would be cost saving.
You know, that I think that's really good, and we certainly see that with the Mendocino County, that we have to kind of ration our legal counsel to be really focused on the departments and the board of supervisors. So because it gets the bills went up really quick, so that's my concern. Even having a lawyer attend all of our meetings, so this is something that we have to be sure we can afford and budget for adequately. But I'd entertain a motion for us to move forward with an RFP.
I would make the motion, but it would include the continuous surveillance, if you will, of the TAC would not be needed because the TAC is not the deciding body.
Okay, so you would exclude the TAC, but you'd make a motion for an RFP that basically covers the board meetings and yes. Okay, Amber.
I don't know that I would make it specific as far as the RFP. I think there may be occasions where there would be a need for that, but I think that having some sort of a hook that allows that if it is deemed necessary by the board, which is respecting what Devin said about that email that comes from left field that turns into a big bill, etc. So typically boards of supervisors, city councils have staff present for their public meetings and quite often for closed session stuff. I think that we're sort of stuck with that model.
Okay. Amber, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I would third, I guess, what Devin said. I think having a single point of contact is essential because having, multiple people have unlimited contact. Legal counsel can get really dangerous and expensive. And then I was also going to say what Director White said is that attendance at TAC meetings, unless there's some specific issue that needs to be addressed, probably is not necessary in most cases. And I don't know, Eric, if you put it in here, I think that you did, but one of the main tasks I would think would be to review GSA contracts and procurement and things like that as well. I think you addressed it, but just to make sure.
Okay, Al?
Yeah, I think that the way the RFP reads, where it says attend board meetings and provide counsel when requested, also TAC meetings, provide counsel when requested. I think that can be interpreted, at least I would interpret it, that you're not going to attend either of those unless you're specifically asked to, and we wouldn't really ask you to unless we had issues that we felt were going to involve some legal question that we needed guidance on. So yes, I second the motion that Director Crane made, and I understanding that I've interpreted the when requested.
Okay.
I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, and to provide clarification, if I may, the RFP is written for in the scope section and asking them for their estimates on their costs, right, and their rates is really to provide them structure on, okay, if we requested that you attend a board meeting and provide counsel during those meetings, assuming this many hours, and then a TAC meeting, assuming this many hours, monthly check-in calls, assuming this many hours over the year. So that way it gives them a goalpost, if you will, to provide a budget for an annual cost. But with the negotiation phase, obviously we can make that clear in the final contract where those items are clearly outlined, where contract review, when requested. Attending monthly check-in calls would be the normal procedure. Making myself be the point person that I can then disseminate information to Chair McGordy or to Beth, being the TAC chair, etc. So those items would be addressed during the process of evaluation and looking at the final contract.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we create an RFP based on the criteria presented here. I think we're ready for a roll call vote.
I noted who made the motion, but I didn't get the second.
The motion was made by Douglas Crane, and it was seconded by Al White, that is.
Thank you. Okay, Director Crane?
Aye.
Director White?
Yes.
Director Robinson? I'm sorry, Director Gasca.
Yes.
Chair McGordy?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries with 4 ayes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the item H, which is June TAC and board meeting dates and times. Okay, Eric, you want to lead this discussion?
Yes. So before Westios came into the role of serving as the GSA administrator, there were, during the week of June 8th and 9th, there are previous engagements that myself and a couple of other staff are already involved in. So we are respectfully requesting the board and TAC consider moving the dates for the TAC meeting to June 22nd and the board meeting to June 23rd in order to accommodate this schedule conflict if possible. And obviously this is for us to make this change, it's important, especially at the board, that we have a quorum is attainable to make that work. So then that meeting day will be productive. And then in terms of the TAC, obviously doing our best to maximize attendance. And so with that, I wanted to call on each board member just to ask if that date works for you, and if the normal time of 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon that has been the previously time that we've gone with for board meetings, if that also still works for you. So June 23rd for the board meeting, going from 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Chair McGordy, does that date and time accommodate for you?
Yes.
Chair, Director Crane, does that date and time accommodate for you?
Yes, and I replied to the survey late.
Thank you. Director Al White, does that work for you?
Yeah, although historically our meetings are 1:30 to 3.
1:30 to 3? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. It'd be nice if they stayed that way, but yes, that day is fine.
Okay. And Director Gasca.
That works for me.
And then also I did get a response from Director Robinson that also would work. And so with that, I think Director McGordy, I think you would probably want to do 2 different votes, one for the board date and time change, and then probably one for the TAC date and time change. Does that work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm curious, did you poll the TAC already in their meeting, or?
I did poll the TAC, but I did not get as many responses. So I was going to rely on the TAC in attendance today to poll that to see if June 22nd works. And if that doesn't work, we can identify another date.
Okay. Well, I guess we could, I don't know that we need to vote on this. We'll just give board direction to change the date.
Board direction works, yes. So is the board in agreement that that date and time would mutually work and that would be a time we can move to?
Yes.
Great. And then now I'd like to address the TAC, and I would like to call on the TAC members to get your thoughts on June 22nd, also from 1:30 to 3 p.m. as the standing time that has been done in the past. TAC Chair Beth, is that date and time?
Yep.
Okay. Michael Harrigan?
Yeah, those days work.
Yes. Sean White? Sean's still with us. I think he may have dropped off. Javier? Be off right now. Adam Gasco.
Yeah, it works for me as well.
Don Seymour?
Yes.
And that looks like that's everyone I have. So that looks like that's going to be a date that also works. So Beth, if that's all right with you, we will change that date for the TAC meeting to be June 22nd from 1:30 p.m. to 3. It looks like we have 5 minutes left. So Chair McGorty, if you would like to open this up for public comments at this time, and then we can move the other items that we're going to discuss today to the next board meeting. I think that would be a good move forward.
Sure. So any director reports or comments? Amber.
I was actually going to suggest if there's any time left to discuss the budget item, it might be important because the board does need to adopt next year's budget at the next meeting before June 30th. And so if Eric brings forward the budget next month and there's any changes or anything, it might cause some issues. If there's any board direction that he could use in developing it now would be appropriate, I think.
Okay. So the first question I have is that you have revenue and income. So what is that based on?
The revenue is based on the contributions by each GSA member. And in fiscal year 21-2022, there were the regular contributions by each GSA member, but there were also additional contributions that occurred. There were one-time additional contributions from GSA members. So that resulted in a revenue and total income of being $291,000. And for fiscal year 2022-2023, I assumed that there were going to be no additional contributions from the GSA members and that the standard contributions that they have agreed to make annually would continue, and that would result in a total income of $275,000.
Okay, comments from any of the other board members? Well, my comment is at some point we have to start getting our constituent base to pony up and support this agency. So it's great that we've been able to do it. We have accomplished so far, but we've done a lot with a little. And you know, we'll have a chance to discuss this a little bit more. Amber, is there anything on your mind that you think we should pay attention to right now?
No, I think that this looks good. I actually hadn't looked at it before. Eric, does this $100,000 for the PMAs, is that the rate and fee study?
That is included in here, and that was part of fiscal year 21-2022, and then that was carried over into the next year where possible. But the rate and fee study is not called out explicitly as being an item in here. And so that could be one suggestion that is brought up, is that the rate and fee study, the $100,000, is solely being allocated to a rate and fee study line item under the implementation part of this budget. And Beth, I believe you have your hand up, but I don't want to
I was
speak for
gonna
Chair
ask-
McGorty.
Yeah, I was going to ask the board, the GSA board, are you interested in having staff bring back a plan for the fee study to begin? I mean, we're creeping up on the end of our fiscal year here. I've heard support for it. Can Eric bring back an RFQ or something along those lines?
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea. Beth?
That was it.
Okay, and Devin?
I was just wondering if it'd be possible for Andy to maybe give us a concept of what their expense has been to do sort of a more thorough rate study, understanding that their basin is bigger than ours, but just an idea.
Andy?
Hi. Yes. So part of the, we did complete a study in 2018 and 2019. So in the center as a plan, we kind of did start. We already had a foundation, even though we evaluated all the options. But our current, we put out an RFP and we received bids per basin between, I think it was about 75,000 up to almost 200,000. And we selected the least cost and highest value team, which was SCI, and things are moving along. So it's I think your budget item is pretty accurate. And I think if legal counsel is retained, that will be tremendously valuable to narrowing down options that are viable for this basin.
Okay, Amber, do you have something else to add?
Yeah, during our initial financial conversations last year when SCI was subcontracting with LWA, they gave us an estimate of between 50 and 100,000 based on kind of the complexity of it and what we want them to look at. So we budgeted on the high side just to be conservative.
Okay, well, we're more or less at the end of the meeting. Eric, anything else you want to add? So we'll consider this next time. We'll adopt a budget, so we'll have to make a decision. Beth?
Are we doing anything about the PMAs then? I mean, the fee, this is great. Sounds like you're gonna receive something back from Eric about the fee study, but what about applying for other grants before the implementation grant opens to start moving on this to capture that winter flow?
So that's a good question. And I guess for next meeting, are we going to look at some of the PMAs that are mentioned in our plan, or what are we going to do?
So the biggest objective for this workshop was to gather information from the tax perspective and the board's perspective, and as everyone attendee as a whole, to inform our insights of how we want to move forward at the next few meetings to discuss the drought, to discuss the PMAs and management actions and grant opportunities further. And so those items will come up again in the next board meeting, and we will be focusing our discussion on discussing the top PMAs that we discussed today, which could include the recharge projects that we were talking about, the low-hanging fruit ones as we coined it, and then also discussing other activities that were identified, being the rain fee study, monitoring activities, well inventory, et cetera.
Okay. Beth, or you still have one more comment? Or
no? Yeah, a question. The kind of in line with what Beth was asking. There are other grants I'm hearing that could be accessed and implemented in a shorter time frame. So I think if that is the case, we should be hearing about those and being able to start that ball rolling at our next meeting. I believe in discussion, but we also need action.
Okay, so Eric, can you research that a little bit? Maybe work with Laura and Amira and figure out what potential grants are available and what we could move on?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we've used our time wisely. We've come to the end of it. And any last thoughts from anyone? Eric, any last things for us to think about?
No, my only comment is thank you so much for spending your morning with us. And I felt like this was an incredibly insightful and productive conversation today at both the TAC and the board level. So I really appreciate your time.
And I do too, because it was a long morning for some of you who attended the TAC and the board meeting. And I appreciate your input. It just makes us stronger when we have more voices and more ideas. So I think it was a good discussion as well. So thank everybody and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.